Welcome. My name is Christopher Peter. President Donald Trump has hit the ground running in implementing his agenda to make America great again. Started with a flurry of executive orders, personnel actions, and other directives on the very first day. Followed day one with a second day that featured the launch of a new artificial intelligence program called Stargate, a stark contrast to the past administration that was largely wary of new technology in the private sector. So far, a great deal has been done to advance the Trump agenda and shape the federal government in the manner the American people voted in favor of. The media and his opponents seem to be struggling to function in this whirlwind environment. There is an inability to deal with a person who is not an ideologue. Typically, the media is able to take potshots at Republicans for being too conservative or traditionalist. Democrats are easy to attack for being excessively woke or radical. But Trump is neither your prototypical conservative politician nor constrained by an obedience to appease an ideological group. His vision is to make the United States function like a society that operates like average Americans of the broadest spectrum want it to. I have never been a big fan of using executive orders. In the past, like pardons, presidents would use them sparingly or with discretions. Now, the federal government typically ends in gridlock after 2 years of one party's complete control. So executive orders become more prominent, an unfortunate outcome of the slim margins experienced either way. So, let us discuss the executive orders, early ideas, events, and issues. The single issue that Trump sought to completely reverse from the previous Biden administration was the record level of illegal immigration that occurred during the past 4 years. Our southern borders has been an open door for people coming here without authorization. Everyone from people simply looking for opportunities to people fleeing prosecution or those seeking to do harm. In a large part of the actions by Republican governors in Florida and Texas, who sent many of the people illegally crossing our border to the states that set up sanctuary for these people, the American public has rightfully turned away from open border politics. Once Americans saw and experienced the crime and financial burden caused by illegals, they quickly turned away. No longer could New Yorkers, New Jerseyans, and many Californians look at issues as a distant one far out of sight. I imagine it must be hard for New Yorkers to see their state hand over $10,000 to these illegals while their policymakers implement the new congestion tax at the same time. Seeing hotels completely overbooked to house people on their dime that are not supposed to be in our borders. As I have stated many times before, we can be somewhat sympathetic to the plight of people around the world, who may not have the same opportunities we have. But the United States must know who is coming into our society and ensure they pose no threat to citizens and legal residents. If people cannot follow the rules and proper procedures, then how can you really trust them to work honestly with you and live in communities peacefully? For too long, we accepted the political constructs that illegal migrants were just good people trying to find opportunity. The reality turns out that many in these caravans are people affiliated with gangs, terrorist organizations, or were previously incarcerated or institutionalized before their home nations realized they could send the bill northward. Hard to ignore the numerous crimes that are being committed by these illegals, including murders, rapes, and a host of other ones. Many times, our local law enforcement have been more lenient to these individuals than they have to citizens and legal residents committing less severe violations. That is really unacceptable to allow criminals to benefit at the expense of taxpayers. I heard the argument that there are already criminals here. Why treat these people any differently? First, I would argue that why would we want to make a problem much worse by importing the same problems from elsewhere? There are many nations who will not even grant entrance for visits to people with records. So why should America have a lower standard? I think we can be compassionate, but we need to be intelligent as well. We need to have a secure border and stop the flow of illegal crossers from making it into our borders. People who need an opportunity and can contribute to our economy should have the ability to make it through the existing process. Maybe economic contributions should expedite their processing. But I am less sympathetic to the idea that people seeking asylum because they committed a crime and want to avoid punishment should be admitted. Does America need any more rabble-rousers who choose violence and menace as a way of life? Again, why add on to the existing domestic problem? The expected raids to remove those with criminal histories and existing crimes has already begun. Reports that hundreds of these people have already been removed with plans for more raids and actions. Churches and schools are no longer going to be able to serve as sanctuaries for these individuals, as they can be charged with crimes. There are many local officials who are cooperating with the effort because their constituents are no longer looking the other way, or they need something from the federal government. If we want our communities to be safer for living, working, raising a family, and running business or other organizations, then we need to stop making them safe havens for the worst in our world. The part of the inauguration address that was pretty interesting to me was President Trump mentioned the intention to declare an energy emergency right in front of Joe Biden, who had no real choice but to sit there and hear how his policies would be reversed across the board. Earlier in the week, Joe Biden sought to tie the hands of the incoming Trump administration by declaring certain areas of interest for drilling as national monuments to prevent the ability of the federal government to issue drilling licenses to energy producers. A few days later, President Trump told America that he would issue a national emergency declaration related to energy, basically making those orders mute. A bit of an in-your-face to a predecessor who wanted the public to believe he was helping to foster a smooth transition, but really was not doing everything he could, especially when it came to the border and selling supplies, and other areas. The biggest driver of inflation was the restriction on domestic energy production that inconveniently came at the same time Russia invaded Ukraine and created a global disruption of the energy market. The insistence of not reversing course at the time helped fuel inflation, although natural market behaviors led to increased drilling and energy producers became more efficient with the land they could drill on. The reality is that everything in the economy is impacted by energy, which fuels production, delivery, and input creation. That is just reality. While we want a broader set of energy options with renewables helping to balance our use of fossil fuels, we are not there yet. There are people who think Trump is completely against electric vehicles, which would be greatly ironic since he is supported by the chief executive of the producer of the most popular electric vehicles and highest-selling electric vehicles. People should not be coerced into buying electric cars through the government manipulating the market. There simply is neither the infrastructure nor the overall interests for these vehicles. If people want to buy an electric vehicle, then by all means go out and purchase one. But it should be something forced upon us. I thought about buying a Tesla before I purchased my current vehicle a few years back. They are really interesting vehicles, and I also considered upgrading to an electric version of the vehicle I was looking to trade in, but it just did not make sense for me. Maybe in the future. The practice of the government trying to influence market decisions and consumer behavior when there is no justification for it is not appropriate. People are increasing their purchases of electric vehicles naturally. Let the market develop rather than coercing the public. On the way out, Joe Biden handed out additional pardons to his family, congressional leaders involved in the January 6th hearings, and other members of the government like Dr. Anthony Fauci. And the manner of how these pardons were reportedly written makes it hard for the general public to give Biden the benefit of the doubt. Interesting the calls for investigations into the allegations surrounding these individuals because it does make sense now that they can be compelled to testify and cannot plead the fifth since there is no threat of prosecution. I do not believe you can plead the fifth because you will look bad. The pardons themselves make these individuals look like criminals without a shadow of a doubt. Innocent people generally do not need a preemptive pardon. As promised, President Trump pardoned almost all of those convicted or being held for crimes committed during the January 6th riots. While opponents want to make it look like these pardons are a reflection on sentiments for law enforcement, these individuals already served 3 to 4 years in prison, treated worse than the common federal prisoners, for crimes that were highly embellished for most of them. The videos and the images did not really reflect any real threat. The vast majority of people seemed to be taking an unauthorized tour of the Capitol. There were some who did crimes and looted, not completely downplaying the event, but they served more time than they really should have if tried for rioting. Remember, Confederates were pardoned in the past to move our nation forward. These individuals were not murderers like the ones receiving commutations a few weeks ago. So let us not get completely carried away with the narrative surrounding them. I think it was the right thing to do as they already served enough time for what really amounted to not much. Rioters and looters rarely see jail time. So this is not an injustice. I think the biggest issue with the whole set of pardon is the preemptive use of the presidential pardon and precedent set because now every administration has the ability to use it. Biden already cemented his legacy as the most ineffective leader in American history, and this simply does more damage to his legacy, especially since he railed against it in the past. All the Democrats who did the same and are now supporting Biden are proving to be hypocrites. I am not the biggest champion of being in the office every day of the week or being remote completely. Personally, I think whatever works for that function or work group should be done. Some fields you really cannot do remotely. Many professions need to be in an office environment or place equipped to provide the service or create the products needed. People have preferred remote work since the pandemic because there are many things that are not enjoyable about getting to the office. Many people tend to like their job a lot more when they avoid the stressful, unpredictable commutes. The comfort of their chosen environments can also help them better deal with the stress of the work. I know many people who are willing to work more hours per day as long as they can remain at home. Remote has helped reduce the cost for workers related to travel, food, and stress. But it can also lead to some undisciplined workers become susceptible to distractions like watching television while working. Some people like to have it as background noise, while others let that background noise become their primary focus. Personally, I like having a hybrid. I think the interactions between coworkers, subordinates, and management can be very productive and helpful in moving projects, tasks, and career aspirations along. The main problem many face with remote working is the lack of visibility that comes with being out of sight and out of mind. I have heard people making decisions on staff reduction state that it is far easier to lay someone off who they rarely see or interact with than a person that they see daily and have to look them in the eyes. While remote work does get you away from all the social politics and office gossip, it can make you simply a business decision, good or bad. The reality for many businesses is that remote workers generally are not always working when they are supposed to be working. Some miss meetings, deadlines, or simply are doing non-work related events during the company time. Generally, one would assume that you work remotely the same hours that you would work in the office, but there are some who think they just have to work something close to the number of hours they are paid. To remove any confusion, federal employees will now have to report to the office 5 days a week. President Trump signed an executive order ending remote work. Imagine needing to do that to get public workers to do their jobs. Expectedly, there will be many workers who will not return to the office and simply abandon their positions. May seem harsh, but I do think public sector workers should be held to a higher standard than people working elsewhere. There is a responsibility that comes with taxpayer funds, which is something we need to be more cognizant of. We want fiscally responsible decisions being made, but sometimes we do not associate the full breadth of what that truly means. People being paid with taxpayer dollars should have the responsibility to generate value or benefit through their service in whatever role they participate in. In the private sector, workers are generally compensated from the revenues or savings generated through product sales, services rendered, or cost savings through innovation. People trade their hard-earned money, receive a product or service, and the workers contributing to the sale, production, or delivery are compensated. In the public sector, federal funds are generated by taking a portion of what is created external to the government, besides fees or other coerced transfers. Taxpayers generally do not receive benefits that correspond to the amount paid. So since the money is coerced, there is a need to make sure that people at least see a value there. People do not want to see their taxes continue to climb and their communities continue to be unsafe, streets unclean, and services lowering in quality, all the while more people are hired and less to show for it. There is not enough value or service quality being generated in the public sector from workers in remote positions. Many are reportedly not doing their jobs because of the perception that they cannot get fired. Well, times are changing and the right thing to do is to make sure that the taxpayers are getting what they pay for. President Trump signed an executive order to shift the federal government away from the matrix of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs and more towards a meritocracy, where hiring will be done on the merits of one's education, experience, and resume, and firing will be done by performance. I believe in the importance of diversity. Our diversity in America is an asset, not a liability. But I do not believe that you do anyone any favors by using one's demographic characteristics as a factor in economic decision-making. In the Biden administration, there were several people appointed specifically because of their demographics. Many of them were highly ineffective in their roles and one even behaved criminally while in office. The challenge America faces is how do we create a fair and equal environment where people can compete for economic access? Too many organizations talk about diversity, but make too many hiring decisions based on the relationship between the candidate and people in the organization. That is a problem. At the same time, placing unqualified candidates in positions they do not have the proper qualifications for can harm stakeholders and the organization as a whole. Organizations are more than their company photo. The quality of their products and services are far more important than how the work staff looks. I believe that there is a need for organizations to diversify their pipelines of talents and expose decision-makers to a wide array of talent that may influence what you truly need for a role. People can be too obedient to a list of characteristics rather than being open-minded about what could work or how that function can be accomplished. Too much focus can be placed at times on how something is done rather than what is done. Sometimes that is important. Other times, it really does not matter. For instance, if I am hiring a person to perform data analysis, my ultimate goal is to have reports and metrics that I can trust. Does it really matter if the person is in the office or prefers to work at home? Again, everything is relative. But sometimes I think people want things to look and feel like they are used to rather than creating things that are the next evolution of the status quo. I think we should diversify our views and be open to finding the best regardless of what that asset looks like. Of course, you must make sure there are no red flags. But I never believe that you can fight hate by punishing random people because they look like the people that committed hate in the past. Especially since all kinds of groups have some issues with hate against others.
My name is Jennifer and here are some thoughts on what has been taking place. Let us start with the controversial hand motion. The main component of the typical liberal or progressive opposition campaign is using distortions or purposefully misleading descriptions of events or actions of the people they oppose. There were some Democrats accusing Elon Musk of making an fascist gesture, which when you watch what really happened it does not match. First, Elon was sending out his love to the crowd. I can agree that is in a weird manner. But it is not the gesture. For those in the Democratic Party who obsess and immerse themselves in the fascist world, you might want to learn more about what the gesture actually looks like. And explain why your version is different from the one you are trying to use as a symbol. Now, the radical pastor. It is a convenient opportunity to be able to send a message to a person that you may disagree with in an environment that favors you. Many cowards do just that. The religious or supposed religious need to separate politics from their sermons because these organizations that for inclusion and good usually have multitudes of examples of not following through when it really counts. The embrace of technology. President Trump, along with the chief executives of Oracle, SoftBank, and ChatGPT, announced a new artificial intelligence project to ensure the United States is at the forefront of the new technology. Ahead of our enemies. Stargate will receive private funding to build data centers needed to expand the use of the technology through the nation. A contrast to the Biden administration who wanted it to be controlled. The media. I think many find it interesting that the media is trying to connect social division with President Trump, who strengthened his appeal across all groups in this past election cycle. An overly sympathetic media to a candidate they tried assist and a former president who they willingly covered up for, continues to show disconnect with the broadest segments of Americans. There will always be a prevailing and defeated side of any election. But an election with a crystal clear victor does not reflect a divided society. Especially when Americans were clearly united in the idea that Biden and his politics had to go. 4 out of 5 did not support Biden and felt he was responsible for the sad state of our nation. I think the media struggles with their role in the new era, where legacy media is no longer viable in the presence of podcasts, blogs, social media, and people with phone cameras. People no longer will look to them on guidance on how to view events, issues, and topics. Look at the ratings. No one is watching. Many of the liberal networks and night talk shows are seeing a decline as well. He really thought he could have won. There are reports released after the election about how much the White House went to protect Biden from how the public perceived him, shield fellow Democrats from realizing the actual condition of the president, and how much Biden was managed. While Kamala was in no way qualified for the position, she did better than Biden would have done if he stayed in. First, I am not buying that fellow Democrats and the media were unaware of the state Biden was in. Second, the debate would have simply been the first of many future blunders on the campaign trail if he stayed in. Even when he was out, he did a great deal of harm by calling Americans garbage. And we should believe he would have turned it around? Not a chance. The Gulf of America. Renaming the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America is the right thing to do. The renaming also is twofold. It could be America as in North America, not just the United States of America. Changing it from the Gulf of Mexico is the right approach and forward thinking. We need to not overlook nations that do not treat us fairly or favor our enemies when they rely on our aid and support. Panama needed a wake-up call to rethink their alliances, and hopefully the threat of recapturing the canal does just that. Tariffs. We do not generally want trade wars, but sometimes we need to alter behaviors of our enemies or nations that are supposed to be our allies. For those who think tariffs do not work, who is our top global trade partner? It used to be China. Now, it is Mexico. We should embrace having Canada and Mexico as neighbors, but we should coordinate for the benefit of all. Not just allow Mexico to put the continent at risk because it cannot control its own cartels or those migrating from South America. If Mexico wants to be an economic partner, it should help on the immigration issues and work to keep its own southern border secure. Same with Canada in preventing their own issues with illegal entrants. But we should not see these neighbors as enemies, but useful partners if we can get along. The 51st and 52nd state might not be a bad thing. That may solve the border issues. Kidding, obviously. Finally, the federal law enforcement agencies will focus on prosecuting and removing threats rather than political prosecutions. Many people think the political prosecutions by the federal government was the lawfare being done to President Trump. But the issue goes well beyond Trump. Many people point out the inappropriate actions done by the Federal Bureau of Investigations to silence or harass pro-life supporters and other people deemed far-right. While many on the left talk about the two Americas, their own politicians were the ones advocating for the maintenance of such an approach, where they actively sought to criminalize supporting views that oppose their own. We now know of the pressure that the Biden administration placed on social media to censor opposing views, going well beyond any content with malicious intent. They wanted views that they disagreed with to be removed, many of which were true statements or content that would not violate terms.
Thank you, Jennifer. Americans voted for a new direction and will now see if they will receive what they asked for. There are many Americans who probably are not fully supportive of every idea, but simply want a better economy, improvements at the border, and to feel safe in their communities. There is a lot of work that will need to be done. The infrastructure needed to restore the quality of law enforcement in a manner that is effective and accountable will be a need. So many police officers walked away because of the politics maintained by progressive leaders at all levels of government. Fully securing our border, restoring our military capability and capacity, elevating our economy, and reinvigorating American confidence will take time. But I think most Americans feel more enthusiastic than they did in October. There is no denying that there is a change and feeling of competence has returned. A big thank you to all of you in the audience. Your viewership is appreciated and valued. Please follow the Christopher Peter Review on social media and continue to visit www.crcreview.com for new episodes. Thank you once again. Until next time.